He used to be called Citizen 625726. He used to call himself Unbroken. When he left his dystopian city behind, he thought he had found paradise. What he found was uglier and darker than anything he could have imagined. This is his story. This is Inferior. Now available in ebook, paperback, and audio form. Links in the description. Like any game setting with RPG elements, Legend of the Five Rings allows for a great degree of specialization. This specialization takes the form of the different schools, essentially places where your character can gain certain skills. And if you want to acquire skills that are super special, you can opt for more advanced training techniques known as paths. Of course, what skills you want to acquire kind of depends on your character class. Yet another example of the RPG elements of L5R. There are technically several different classes like monks or artisans, but as a general rule, it kind of all falls into three very broad categories. The Bushi, which is your obvious fighter class, the Shugenja, that are your magician class, and the Courtiers, which is basically your social class. Of course, each clan has its own schools, and each school has its own particular techniques that you can learn. In this video, we'll be talking about the Courtiers of a most unlikely great clan, the Crab Clan. Which, I know, it sounds weird. Crab Clan Courtier sounds like an oxymoron, like Amish hacker. But, much as they loathe the politicking of the court, the Crab Clan have enough wisdom to recognize that it's the only game in town sometimes, and you've gotta play the game. As you might imagine, though, as one of the most militant of the great clans, the other being the Lion, the Crab have the fewest schools and paths dedicated to social interaction. And technically, one of them isn't really a courtier school, but an artisan school, the Kaiu blacksmiths. But as I've said before, artisan schools are so few in number that they're often lumped into one of the big three classes, the Courtiers, the Bushi, or the Shugenja. Now, of course, it's kind of a no-brainer that the Kaiu would have a blacksmithing school. Their namesake founder, in fact, made his name by forging a sword specifically for the purpose of killing an Oni. And seeing as the Kaiu family have always been the armorers of the Crab Clan, it makes sense that they're the ones who make the blades. The most prominent example of this workmanship being the legendary Kaiu swords, which are considered among the most prized weapons in all of the Emerald Empire. So prized, in fact, and requiring such skill to make that only 5 such blades are manufactured per year. And those 5 Kaiu swords are only made in one place, Kaiu's Forge, built beneath the castle of Kaiu Shiro. It was upon this forge that Kaiu, namesake founder of the family, forged Chikara, the ancestral sword of the Crab Clan, the very same blade that he, Hiruma, and Kuni used to slay the Hatsusuru no Oni upon Hida's command. It is perhaps the most sacred thing in all of the Kaiu family. A Kaiu sword may look functional, or lack the kind of artistry one might expect of a sword made by the Kakita or Agasha families, but no one would ever accuse the Kaiu of making swords that don't do their job. At the very least, a Kaiu sword can be expected to cleave solid stone in twain. It is almost unheard of for a Kaiu sword to be given to one that is not of the Crab Clan, and it is regarded as a singular dishonor if someone who is not of the family of the holder of such a sword even touches it. But now we must move on to actual courtiers of the Crab Clan, and we begin with the so-called Severed Hand, the only non-Yasuki sponsored courtier school of the Crab Clan. Originally founded by veterans of the Crane Crab War, the Severed Hand is comprised entirely of those Bushi who are either too old or too maimed to continue in active service and yet lack the temperament to be sensei at a crab dojo. Of course, the only members of the Severed Hand that are actually sent to the Imperial Court are those that have the patience to put up with the court, which, as you might expect, is a pretty rare trait among most crab samurai. Those who do have the patience eventually come to see the court as a different kind of battlefield, one where clever wordplay can be just as dangerous as a sword thrust. And so, crab courtiers of the Severed Hand employ techniques like Strength of the Bamboo, in which they draw upon the stoic power of earth to resist the tricks, temptations, and blandishments of enemy courtiers. But since we are talking about Crab Clan courtiers, that means it's about time that we get around to the mainstays of the crab in the arena of politics, the Yasuki family. One form of Yasuki courtier that I didn't really expect to see are the Yasuki Sumai, essentially sumo wrestlers. There really isn't much to say about Yasuki Sumai, as they're really not that much different from the typical crab sumai, except that they are former crab sumai who, quote, used the skills they had honeyed in the courtly tournaments, and angled for a subsequent career as a diplomat or a Yasuki trader. I'll probably go into crab sumai in more detail when I get around to a big video on Bushi of the Crab Clan, as it's more relevant there. But what little there is seems to suggest that Yasuki Sumai are kind of like a transitional period. Sportsmen who are trying to become courtiers. But now the time has come to talk about the real mainstay of the Yasuki family. Every samurai clan has their own distinct take on what it is to be a courtier, an overarching theme, if you will. And for the Yasuki, that is unequivocally merchant. Essentially, the terms Yasuki merchant and Yasuki courtier are pretty much interchangeable. While nearly everyone else thought that mercantilism and commerce were dirty and dishonorable, the Yasuki always understood it to be the lifeblood of the Emerald Empire. People always want goods and services. Someone's got to provide them, whether they be essentials like grain, cloth, timber, or iron, or frivolous things like jewels, fine delicacies, or other novelties. Even so-called illicit trades were considered fair business for the Yasuki, hence their involvement in smuggling, gambling, drug sales, and geisha houses. Of course, this is why their old patrons, the Crane clan, considered them an embarrassment. The Yasuki, of course, resented this, as it was their mercantilism in all manners of trade that helped make the Crane wealthy, which of course led to the late 4th century Daimyo Yasuki Tsanumi to defect to the Crab Clan, thus triggering the Crane Crab War. The Yasuki were very quick to adopt the rough, pragmatic honesty of the Crab Clan, while also retaining some of the smooth polish of their Crane forebears. And unlike the Crane, the Crab actually appreciate what the Yasuki do for them, and they would indeed prove invaluable to their new clan. For where most Crab samurai disdain negotiation, the Yasuki thrive on it. They love the art of the deal, and have many techniques to ensure that deals are always to their advantage. Carp smiles, for example, a technique that teaches the merchant how to become skilled in reading and manipulating the emotions of a potential customer. There's also the effective, although possibly less honorable, Koku Speaks, a technique by which a Yasuki merchant learns how to spend coin in order to gain advantage in a social interaction. Basically a polite way of saying bribe. The thing is, for all the dishonor attributed to the commercial activities of the Yasuki family, they also have a reputation, particularly among the common folk, for being very honest in their trade dealings. They are out for profit, and they make no secret of that, and it's an honesty that most customers of the Yasuki family greatly appreciate. Plus the fact that the Yasuki never stoop to selling shoddy goods to their customers. A Yasuki merchant might charge a high price, but the customer knows that he will be getting something that's worth every koku. In the words of the great 12th century Yasuki daimyo Yasuki Taka, necessity dictates that I sell a product for all it is worth, and I cannot know its worth until I know how much a customer is willing to pay for it. All well and fine for the Yasuki family, but the Crab Clan are ever pragmatic, and this brings us to what is arguably the Yasuki's most important role and most important school, at least as far as the crab military is concerned. The Yasuki quartermaster. Thanks in part to their land's proximity to the Shadowlands, the territory of the Crab Clan is the most resource-poor in the Emerald Empire. As a result, they are a lot more dependent on imports than the other great clans. And of course, since the Crab are so forthright to the point of rudeness and thus scorn negotiation, this has always been their greatest handicap, especially in terms of maintaining the never-ending struggle against the Shadowland monsters. Logistics has often been that part of warfare that so many people disregard or just don't find interesting, and yet it is also so often that which has made or broken armies and campaigns. More than anything else, this was the most important thing that the Yasuki family brought to the Crab Clan when they defected to them. With their connections, their understanding of business, and negotiation skills, the Yasuki family have been able to ensure that the Crab have what they need to prosecute their wars. The Crab Clan was always a fairly well-oiled war machine, even compared to other militant clans like the Lion, but it was the Yasuki and their logistical advantage that was the missing piece, if you will. And so, when Crab armies are in need of someone to handle the logistics, they always recruit from the Yasuki merchants, and thus, the Yasuki quartermaster is born. As the title implies, a Yasuki quartermaster is in charge of overseeing supply and feeding of the soldiers, making sure they have everything they need to fight as well as they can. When a Crab army is on the march, it is the job of the quartermaster to find and obtain whatever supplies can be found in their given locality, employing such techniques as "we acquire what we must," which teaches Yasuki quartermasters how to find what an army needs and obtain it quickly. They are even empowered to use force and/or intimidation to get what they need. And on that note, we turn to admittedly one of the less savory aspects of the Yasuki family. An aspect that helps you kinda see where the other great clans might be coming from when they scorn the Yasuki as dishonorable. And that is the Yasuki extortionist. Yet another product of the Crane-Crab War. In the early years, as they began settling into their new allegiance to the Crab Clan, the Yasuki were still experimenting with how much of their Crane heritage they were going to keep and how much of their new Crab heritage they were going to adopt. And so the school that eventually became the Yasuki extortionists began as an effort by the Yasuki to employ intimidation tactics in the politicking of the imperial court. Quite appropriate considering that they were now aligned with the Crab Clan, but it also turned out to be an utter disaster. Countless Yasuki samurai employed these new tactics in the court, only to fail so miserably that it cost countless members their honor. Many were forced to commit seppuku in order to wash away the stain. The whole idea of employing such methods and techniques would have been abandoned entirely if it had not been for a certain Yasuki Mitsunari. He remained convinced that such tactics still had a purpose. It just was in the wrong environment. The imperial court is a place where subtlety is your greatest weapon. But there was a place for the kind of heavy-handed tactics that were being used: commerce. Mitsunari was well aware of the kind of strong-arm tactics used by moneylenders from the lower classes of Rokugani society, and reasoned, correctly as it turned out, that these same techniques worked just as well on those of the samurai class. And thus, by this reorientation, the Yasuki extortionists became what they are now. Moneylenders who profit through loans and interest payments and are more than willing to use intimidation and blackmail to get what they want. Their only known technique, "do me a favor," is basically where the extortionist is taught how to discover the financial weaknesses of their potential customers. With that knowledge, the extortionist can then pressure the client into calling upon the Yasuki for assistance, which of course comes with a price. And those are the courtiers of the Crab Clan. Master swordsmiths, reluctant veterans, and merchants well-versed in the art of driving a hard bargain. The only crabs that are equally adept at both the velvet glove and the iron fist. Some may be disreputable, some even dishonorable. But at the end of the day, the Crab Clan has never cared as much about honor as it has about what works. If you're useful to them, they will thank you for the work you do on their behalf. Which is why they were so much better bosses for the Yasuki family than the Crane ever were. Crab samurai are nothing if not pragmatic, and they know that certain tools are best suited for certain jobs. If you want someone that can infiltrate a den of monsters and come back alive, you go to the Hiruma. If you want the best armor and weapons in the land to kill monsters with, you go to the Kaiu. If you want the kind of spells that may not be as flashy or impressive as the Isawa can make, but are perfectly tailored for the kind of monsters you're dealing with, the Kuni are the way to go. And if you want samurai that are just as capable of leading armies as they are crushing their enemies' skulls, then the Hida are the obvious choice. But if you want to be able to ensure that all these different people have what they need to do their jobs, and if you want to be able to get those things for the best possible rate, and as an added bonus are willing to do that kind of icky, boring political stuff, that is when you call on the Yasuki.